Money, or the lack of it, was a constant problem for Chapman. Ferrari and later Renault virtually had the backing of their respective governments. Chapman always had to fight for private finance and resented having it taken off him for the public purse.
Chapman had a deep dislike of paying income tax if he could possibly avoid it, and it was extended to all aspects of Team Lotus. So fairly early on in the 1960s, when he was running some very expensive professional drivers, Jimmy Clark and Graham Hill, he and Fred Bushell together established an operation called GPD, Grand Prix Drivers, which was an offshore company. I think it had roots in Panama and was operated out of Geneva. And the purpose of this was to avoid any funds being channeled back into the United Kingdom and becoming subject to British income tax.
And unfortunately, I had said, well, of course, this is a perfectly good example of tax evasion. And he nearly got up and hit me. And he gave me a great big lecture how about tax evasion is a crime, tax avoidance is a science, and that he was all involved with the science and didn't want to know about the crime.
The racing team's finance was intended to come from his car company's profits, but it too had recurring financial crises. To raise money, Chapman tried to cash in on his name by selling shares in Lotus.
Colin Chapman never ever should have gone public with his company. That was a huge mistake. I think he acknowledged that, and he certainly would have bought it back if he possibly could. He had no patience whatsoever for the interests of shareholders if he continued simply running a private company, which is what he should have done, and of course what he wanted to do. Things would have been different.
He had great difficulty in being able to compartmentalise a public company, its money, private company, its money. In fact, there were occasions when his private companies bailed out the public company. He never was able to differentiate between them, and it didn't matter to him anyway. The shareholders of Lotus were purely people who'd been given the opportunity of participating in Colin Chapman's success.
There was an element of the hooliganing, Colin, and we had quite a few hooligan nights out. I won't tell you how we wrecked a paddle steamer on the River Thames, that's another story. But part of the public flotation was we rented a bus and went round London in it and had a marvellous time. And at one point, the police were loading the ladies of the night into a Black Maria, and by the time the police had got the ladies of the night in, the Black Maria had no tail lights and no headlights, and Colin had got the lot.
For 10 years, Chapman had struggled to put British racing green at the front. But overnight, he painted Lotus red. In fact, the exact colours of a gold leaf cigarette packet. It caused outrage. This was an entirely new type of sponsor. His flying fag packets would open the financial floodgates, changing motorsport forever. Bizarrely, Chapman hated cigarettes. Smoking at Lotus was forbidden.
We would really come under fire. There's no need to be lighting up cigarettes. You don't need smoking. I don't like the smell of smoke. It's not a good thing to do. So you very quickly learned that it wasn't worth the aggravation, because his willpower was such. He was a very strong-willed person, and that was how I suppose we eventually all did as we were told, was that he almost nagged you to death over it, that no, you weren't to smoke.
By 1970, Chapman had romped home to his 4th World Championship. But the establishment only rewarded him with 2nd prize in the honours list.
The next thing I heard was that he was going to get the CBE. They actually told me through the back door before they told him. And when I inquired further as to why it was only the CBE, they said, unfortunately, he hit a policeman in a country that has a queen, which was, he actually hit a policeman at the Dutch Grand Prix one year and was locked up for 2 days because he thumped him really hard, because they wouldn't let him in the pits. And had that been, shall we say, a policeman in Yugoslavia, that would have been all right. But if you insult the crown by hitting one of the policemen, then you don't get the knighthood.
1978 was the most glorious year of Chapman's racing career, dominating Formula One as no team had ever done before, winning 8 Grand Prix, often coming home first and second, the competition lucky to be on the same lap. The season ended with Lotus just 1 win short of Ferrari's all-time total. But amid glory, death struck again. In Italy, Ronnie Peterson, the number 2 driver, crashed.
I have very, very clear memories of Ronnie Peterson saying to me at the end of his contract year, well, I just don't intend to be another dead hero for Colin Chapman.
When Peterson died in last year's model, Chapman refused responsibility, blaming the racing team for not finishing a new and safer car in time.
Colin always felt Peterson wouldn't have been killed if he'd have been driving a Type 79 with a carbon fibre tub. He was driving a Type 78 with an aluminium honeycomb, and it crumpled and crushed his feet, and he eventually died with a poisoning or something. And that was Colin turned his face against the racing team then. He became much more remote. Instead of being in the workshop with them, laughing and joking, he didn't go into the workshop anymore.
Chapman now seemed to lose his passion for racing. It would be 4 years before Lotus won another race. With his sponsors threatening to quit, Lotus sales were crashing in the States due to new safety regulations. He desperately needed a new source of cash. One day in 1978, racing journalist Peter Windsor found himself alone in Chapman's office.
I sat down, and there was a notepad in the middle of the desk, and I kid you not, in the middle of the notepad there was just one word, and it was DeLorean, with a line under it, and it was Chapman's handwriting.
The DeLorean sports car presents crisp aerodynamic Italian styling, featuring fully counterbalanced gull-wing doors, forward luggage compartment carpeted.
John DeLorean, previously number 2 at General Motors, was a marketing genius. With this slick video, he was able to sell a dream. No one would have known that the cars it featured were just 2 cobbled-together prototypes. Within 9 days, the British government gave him £35 million to build a factory in strife-torn Belfast. It opened in early 1981 with much fanfare, and closed a year later, amid controversy. Falling sales, bad reviews and accusations of DeLorean's extravagance encouraged the government to refuse more funds. Within the year, £80 million of public money had been lost. The scandal arose when the receiver went through the books and alleged that design work on the car, carried out by Lotus, had been paid for twice. The second payment, of over $17 million, went to a mysterious Swiss company, GPD, in a contract signed by John DeLorean, Lotus finance director Fred Bushell, and Colin Chapman. It had been 4 years earlier when Chapman first heard news of the DeLorean grant. He was furious.
Lotus applied to the government for a loan or a grant of about £400,000 to assist with further forward development, and the company received what you can only call the lame duck letter. Within days, Colin had read, and we'd all read, that John DeLorean was going to receive £35 million for what was a job-creating scheme in Northern Ireland to build sports cars on a greenfield site. Create jobs, one up to the government. Colin saw this as a personal snub. He saw this as a subsidised effort to destroy our market, because we were very strong in North America where the DeLorean was going to be sold, and the cars would meet head on. And he was naturally very, very angry, and he called a very short, sharp meeting, and he said, we're going to have some of that.
Chapman's chance came when DeLorean told the British government he could turn his early prototype into a production model in a quarter of the usual time.
DeLorean desperately needed somebody to actually make a car that would actually be roadworthy and pass the very stringent American tests. And he went to Porsche first of all, and they said, well, we'll do it, but it'll take us 7 years. We take 7 years to make a new car, and it'll cost you £40 million. And he had 18 months. He promised to do it in 18 months. And so he went to BMW, and they said, well, we'll do it in 4 years, but it'll cost you about £50 million. We don't really want to do it anyway. And he went around everywhere, and the one person he knew could do it for him, and he had immense admiration for, was Colin Chapman.